Welcome everyone to Larry Lash Tours, an air charter company that provides air concierge to every one of our customers at their own pleasure.
We're talking about tourism, we're talking about aviation, and this is what we have as a podcast. We have a podcast called Journey Beyond,
where we've been interviewing guests from all over the country when it comes to aviation and wildlife conservation. But for this episode, we've had the chance to interview two very lovely guests from Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association.
What do you do when an elephant comes to your land? We have national parks and reserves. And all these parks and reserves, I think only two are fenced.
Wildlife conservation, it has been perceived like a phenomena that is quite foreign. Conservation is very expensive, and that's one thing that people don't talk about. Our communities, our people have lived with wildlife for many years, but because of the term conservation, then it seems like it's a foreign concept.
So sit back, relax, take a cup of coffee as you enjoy this brilliant show.
And as always, please like, share, and subscribe so we can all be together in this journey where we go beyond.
Welcome so much to this lovely podcast. We want to dedicate this show to a legend. Shout out to you. Most of the media people respect you, and we've embraced that God had a better plan for you. And Kevin.
So the question for today is what happens when the people who live alongside wildlife are the front line to protect it? And with us we have our two very lovely guests. I will let them introduce themselves and what it is they do in Kenya Wildlife Conservation Association.
Greetings, Gladys Warige is my name, with the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association.
I'm Joyce Mbataru. I'm the comms lead at the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association.
When it comes to the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association, what exactly are the challenges that you guys come across when you're doing your work, or rather what it is that you do?
Numerous challenges.
Maybe you can highlight a few.
Yes. Number one, wildlife conservation traditionally has been, or actually it has been perceived like a phenomena that is quite foreign, whereas it is not foreign. Our communities, our people have lived with wildlife for many years, but because of the term conservation, then it seems like it's a foreign concept. And so basically people understanding what conservation is all about, why it is important, and especially for wildlife, people might understand why tree conservation is important, forest conservation is important, water conservation is important, but wildlife, many people don't see. Because people see wildlife as a menace because of the kind of destruction. You could ask communities, for instance, in Amboseli. They have seen the wrath of it. You've heard about lions coming and waking up and killing. Recently, you saw just in the neighborhood of Rongai, just the whole unfortunate incident. You find communities within the planting areas or the agricultural zones where basically you have your whole plantation of maybe your crop, you had waited for that, the school fees, it's entirely wiped out. So people don't really understand why should I have wildlife. And you've seen even in the likes of Kitengela, those who are traditionally been wildlife corridors. Right now, you see nothing. We've all occupied 50 by 100s wildlife areas. It's now settlement zones. People are trying, our population is bursting. And so space is a big issue. People understanding the value of wildlife. People have never seen wildlife as a value. It's more of a menace. Communities who have traditionally lived with wildlife are also looking for alternative ways because patterns of climate change have changed their way of lives. So it's enormous. It's expensive. Conservation is very expensive, and that's one thing that people don't talk about. It's expensive in terms of what it takes to conserve, the cost you put, the input, but also what do you forego. So it's expensive, and so who bears the cost? It's the communities. At what level? How do you bring in? So it's a very complex agenda. But those are sort of the high key issues that come about in terms of wildlife conservation.
Okay, that's an array of issues. You've mentioned something to do with the community. I'm sure even in terms of the challenges that you face with the community, I'm sure there are areas where you've worked with the community to ensure that your work flows a bit smoothly. Could you have a few of those projects in mind?
I'll mention a bit and I'll pass it to my colleague Joyce, and also to say that when you want to say conservancies, I think it's important that people appreciate what a conservancy is.
Yeah.
Majority of people know or relate wildlife with national parks and reserves. But actually, when you look at the whole distribution of wildlife, we have more wildlife occurring outside the parks. Only about 35% of wildlife is within the national parks and the reserves. The rest is outside with people's lands, private land, community land.
Wow.
And so those are big areas. And so looking at all those challenges that we discussed, then the idea of the conservancy is how do you create structures, processes that enable the communities, the landowners as well, also communities are landowners, private landowners, community landowners, to manage wildlife as a profitable land use. Profitable in the sense it supports the entire ecosystem to function, but also is gainful in terms of economics within the communities. So it's that whole arena. And so when you talk about communities, it's wide. We have different types of communities. We have community that people recognize as community typically. And then we have also land or private landowners who can be you, who can be me, who can be the large landowners people relate with, maybe the like Ep1 ranches and all those places. But within the conservancy network, we have majority of the conservancies being on community land. And so within KWCA, we are a national network of conservancies, both community and private. And within the network of 100 and 215, we have about 70% of the membership being community land. On community land.
Wow.
And so a lot of people don't think just wildlife is mainly in private lands and actually white owned, but we have majority of the wildlife and conservancies being within community areas. And so a lot of our engagements is through that structure. And maybe Jess, you can mention a bit of our projects with them.
Yeah, so maybe also to for Kenyans to understand the conservancies more better, you're looking at a situation where we have national parks and reserves. And all these parks and reserves, I think only 2 are fenced. So you're looking at Lake Nakuru National Park, which is fenced, and then you have Nairobi National Park, which only, I think, is fenced halfway. The southern part of Nairobi National Park is not fenced, and therefore you have a situation where you have a country with big migratory mammals, moving from one place to another. So they would tend to move into these lands that are not within the government protected areas. So they would move to community and privately owned lands. And therefore that is where now the conservancy concept comes in, because what do you do when an elephant comes to your land? It has moved from, say, Amboseli National Park and it's within your land. What do? You have to coexist with it, right? Because you can't move it back to the park.
Actually, I have a question regarding that. So they say that for you to own free land, you just need one rhino in your piece of land, and you will be given rights to that land. Is that true?
Can you either confirm or deny these allegations?
No, actually, I think the different types of species and wildlife generally, I think they move to different lands, whether it's private, community or government land, depending on where I think they feel they are more safer. And also for other reasons. It could be for different ecological functions, but mostly it's usually in search of pasture and water, so mostly natural resources. But also there are some wildlife like they're called ungulates. It could be the impalas or the zebras. They would move to community lands or private lands to escape threats, predators, for example. So you have the national parks with perhaps maybe thickets of long grass, and for a zebra or as an impala, they won't feel secure there, knowing there could be a predator somewhere there aiming for them. So they usually tend to go to places where they feel more secure, and usually it's around the communities, areas, or within even households. Like an impala would feel more safer here because it can see from far where a predator is, so it's more safer here than if it's in a thicket where they are not sure whether there is a lion or a cheetah there. And so when you look at wildlife migratory patterns, it's for those reasons. And so and that's for the reason of our parks not being fenced, then they would tend to move. And so communities and private landowners, they usually feel like, okay, what do I do with this wildlife? You can't move zebras. You know, people think that it's easy, that you can just tell them, shoo, go, and they will move. But it's actually not easy. And so when you look at the history of the country, we had some of this, and today communities and landowners now taking care or conserving this wildlife. Unfortunately, this usually it's a voluntary effort, because you're not paid for it. You'll only be paid for it if you apply for a user right with KWS to ideally benefit from it. So you conserve it, and then you benefit from it, because wildlife in Kenya is owned by the Kenyan people. KWS comes to manage it on our behalf. So it's a natural heritage. So I don't have powers to use it as KWC, as KWC or whatever, whether it's an individual or a community. And therefore, it just so happens that if it comes to your land, you can do two things. You can benefit from it, or you can call KWS to come and remove it from your land. So we have seen this effort actually being a voluntary effort for most communities and private landowners, and so they actually conserve it on behalf of the Kenyan people. And so so that's how the Conservancy network came to be. But it also and it was there for many years. I mean, we know of communities who have coexisted with wildlife for many years. The Maasais, the most pastoralist communities, still today, even when you go to the Somali areas in Wajir, Garissa, these are people who live with giraffes. I think you have seen photos of giraffes in Wajir town or I don't know, Garissa town. They are used to living with this wildlife, and it's also part of their culture and tradition, you know, as communities that, you know, they have lived with this wildlife. And even our own traditions and cultures, even when you look at the namings of our communities, you know, and there are some communities who ascribe, or they have totems. Are they called totems or something like that? Ideally, it's how you are ascribed a particular wildlife within your community. Among the Kikuyu communities, we have people who are named after wildlife, Njogu, Ngari, and you know, and the like. And so, wildlife was part of our it was part of our tradition, and we valued wildlife. But I think the challenge has been mostly when communities don't seem to benefit from it and other people benefit from it. So going to a national park, of course it benefits the entire country, of course through tourism fees and all that, and it goes to pay the staff of you know, whether it's KWS, whether it's a reserve and all that. And what happens to those who live with it? How are they compensated?
Actually,
you know,
I also had another question based on that. Is there like a training or a community where you guys call the community to come and tell them, hey, there is the other day I saw ants.
Yes.
I mean, we grew up with these ants, and all of a sudden you're wondering, Allah,
why are people exporting it?
Exactly. And like,
The quail.
do you guys really do the community sensitization of telling people that this thing can benefit you, not only monetarily, but economic. What is it called? Tourism in agricultural way.
Yeah.
Gladys.
Yeah. I must first say that the economics are very good.
Okay.
But if you just approach it from a point of economics, then it's not very sustainable.
Okay.
Why I say this is that when you look at the wildlife conservation model, it's not just that you're conserving that species. It's not just about that mammal. It's not just about that predator. It's not just about that. You're conserving the network, the ecosystem that comes with it.
Okay.
And so that's one of the entry points, and that's one I think that people need to understand. And it also goes along, why is it that we need big spaces of wildlife? When you look at the traditional systems of this country, the land utilization, we have this country has about 80% of our land mass being rangelands. That's largely arids and semi-arids.
Yeah.
And so not convenient for agriculture, for instance. And so these are areas that can do well with livestock ranching and the likes of conservation and so such a compatible land uses. But when you look at now, even the areas we've had traditional wildlife, the Masai Mara, just here at the Kapiti, the Magadi areas, just down there, you've seen systems shifting that even Masai themselves are being moved out of their own area. And you've heard the stories of even in Kajiado, there was a time there was a moratorium, in the sense that you said they sell a 50 by an acre or 2 acres or even 50 acres. This is land that has been basically used over the years for that pastoral nature of life of livestock. But now you sell it, you don't realize that you've cut short what you knew and what your generation has known. And then basically you've not sold it's not just about wildlife. You've sold the area that has been used for wildlife. You've sold your land that has been a source of livelihood. And so you've seen a lot of the wildlife areas and the communities in those areas being defranchised of their land. They've sold. Masai Mara, all those areas, some areas of Ngano, sometimes back it was group ranches, subdivided, so collectively owned, but now subdivided into individual parcels. What do you do? Maguta. And then guys from central people come there running, you do wheat and all that. And then you've lost it. You've lost, and then you see the tradition of agriculture is not about conservation, it's about kutumia tu. So you don't have that perspective of, so there's destruction. And so when you destroy it, you've seen now all these things we're talking about, climate change, blah blah blah, all those things. So it's conservation benefits. Number one needs to about ensuring that the health of that land is maintained such that it can support your livestock. And that has been our biggest approach, that Conservancy is not just about wildlife, it's about wildlife plus other compatible land uses. And compatible uses is about livestock. If you're doing livestock, you can still have good pastures, you have good structures of grazing. And a case example is that the recent drought, is it around 2020, 2022, around the COVID, is it around 2020 or thereabout? We had significant drought. And one of the success stories of benefits that we saw from Conservancies is that some land areas or the conserved areas by communities, the Conservancies, because they do rotational grazing of livestock, so kila zote zinaingia at the same time. The structures of how, when you do seasonal grazing, where do you go about it. Then during the drought, they were not caught up by drought, and they were even helping some guys from Magadi area to go and take their livestock there to survive. You will see livestock, and that's why you see a lot of also conflicts in Laikipia, because in the conservancy area there's grass, because they've managed their landscape in a way that at least it's able to regenerate across the seasons. And so when your neighbors have not had that practice, the grass is green at the side.
Is
so
it
you
called
see
practice or education?
So that's the kind of education, and that's the kind of education, and that's the kind of education you're trying to promote. That Conservancy is about conservation of your land, your way of life, doing things that can support your livelihood, way of life, that can also complement even the wildlife. That it also gives you complementary uses, and that's why Joyce was talking about tourism. Conservancies are known to have tourism, and tourism. Why tourism is because, as we said, who bears the cost? Unfortunately, because of our deficits, government deficits, not much funding goes into conservation and wildlife conservation. So we're always having budget cuts or budget gaps. And so to complement that or supplement that, we have tourism in conservancies. So communities try to engage with their investors to bring in tourism to offset that cost, because how much does it take even to come up with a conservancy from start to mature? And we talked about we have 215 members, and all these people think they all have tourism. It's only a fractional, about 40% or less that have tourism. So it's
So the other ones work or just
exactly, and so that is largely in Masai Mara, Laikipia area, and around Nakuru, Naivasha area, and so that is the money that comes in to offset that cost. So what we do is that when it comes to benefits, we are trying to educate our membership that look at it from a holistic approach. It's not just about the money, it's your way of life. It's about also securing your land. And especially we have now what we call a Community Land Act of 2016 that came to basically recognize community land rights and also secure them and also sort of register them, such that you as a community have your title and you do not have the histories of what we've been seeing, illegal demarcation of community land, subdivision, sales, and then communities also don't have, they're left landless. And so we're trying to have all those, that wildlife is a land use that really helps you as a community to develop. And so our role is to educate that across board. It's not easy. There are communities that are have lost about 90% of their wildlife. Areas like Baringo, they used to be as rich as Laikipia. But now you go there, a dik is mboga in some communities. You don't see even a dik. So how do you get back that knowledge that they appreciate? A lot of generations right now, we are a youthful generation.
Yes.
They don't relate to those stories Joyce was talking about in Njogu. Nowadays, even getting your kids calling them Njogu, man. So you see, we've lost touch of those processes. How do you now get to have people value, even the youthful generation value in a way that resonates with them? And so job creation within the conservancies. We have a lot of our members, have about 4,000 rangers who are mostly youth employed directly by the conservancies. So how do you, that's also basically educating, you can employ your people. You can ensure that you don't have experienced those droughts. So we do a lot of those education programs. And so our focus is largely governance, helping them to create proper structures of governance, creating the tools that enable do good governance. And especially on community conservancies, it's not easy because you're talking about collective. How do you bring, you can harness collective ownership, collective management, collective governance, decision making. So we try to work with that. We try also to just demonstrate what are the opportunities of benefiting, but also where can you benefit. So we sort of create platforms where they can link with investors. We have a platform that we have recently developed on linking opportunities, including tourism development. We are trying to also open up opportunities for carbon. How do you educate them also to better contract, because also that's a big issue. So it's also not just where, it's how to do it in the right way that also addresses issues of equity, inclusivity, such things. So that's largely how we approach in terms of educating and empowering and just demonstrating, but also creating opportunities. I think Joyce can discuss about a project we did for livestock for women, trying to integrate all those things. So
Actually, I was about to ask, what are your current projects for this year, 2025? I know for most institutions, you normally close books June. So I don't know about what. Nyinyi from January to
from
December.
January to December.
So what are your projects for 2025?
Actually for 2025 we are in an exciting time because we just launched our strategic plan for that runs between 2024 to 2030. So we are aligning our strategy with the 30 by 30 goals. I don't know whether you've heard about that, but it's a global target under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we have, I think, all countries party to it apart from the US and the Vatican. They are not party to that convention. So ideally countries are supposed to abide by that treaty or convention. And so all countries are supposed to reach their 30 by 30 targets, meaning that you need to have increased your area under conservation to 30% by 2030. And of course, Kenya is a party to that convention, and they see conservancies as one of the strategies for the country to reach that target, because currently the area under conservation in Kenya is only 8%, behind our East African countries.
Wow.
8%, and that's national parks and reserves. And then of course we have the forest reserves, which I think it's at 5%. So if you put a total to all the protected areas in Kenya, I think we reach that'll be 8 plus 5, that gives you about, I think, 13%. And therefore conservancies currently we are at 18%. You know, and Gladys did mention about that the different stages of development, and you know, we want to sort of get financing to conservancies that may never even get funding, because you see, when you talk about wildlife, most people think about the big mammals. So
Yeah.
if you have elephants, rhinos, ants, exactly, all those, you know, you ideally deserve financing. But wildlife is anything, including plants. It could be the ants, it could be small mammals, you know, the squirrels. You know, we are supposed to basically protect all the wildlife that we have, and there's some of these conservancies that they're in far-flung areas, some of which areas that are of, you know, security threats. You know, we have a lot of giraffes in the northeastern part of our country, but most people will never go there for tourism because of security challenges and all that. And so how do you then support these communities taking care of that giraffe? Because tourism clearly might not work for in that part of the country. And so we have these conservancies scattered across the whole country, actually in 30 counties. And so you find that not all areas are good for, you know, for tourism, or they don't have the tourism potential. And so we are relying on Kenyans basically to visit some of these places so that they can appreciate the efforts that the communities are putting in, you know, when it comes to wildlife conservation. And you know, most Kenyans go to national parks and reserves, and this funding goes to, of course, the government, right? What about the ones now that take care of that wildlife, that, you know, sometimes they may not be targeted by Treasury to pay them for the efforts that they are taking to pay that wildlife? And so one of the things that we are doing as KWCA is sort of change that narrative and get more Kenyans to rally behind some of these conservancies. And you know, one of the things that we are also looking at is conservation is also a business enterprise, or we can say a social enterprise. It's an investment, and one of the things we want to show Kenyans is that conservation can also be an investment, that you don't have to do you know, kazi free, you know, like it's the way you do agriculture is done as an investment. You grow crops so that, you know, when they mature, you make money out of it. But conservation, the communities that live with it actually bear the biggest costs of conservation. So you can imagine if you're in a wildlife area and you're a farmer, you can imagine just when you're about to harvest your maize, elephants ndo zimekuja. Just, you know, you're thinking of harvesting that maize the following day, then elephant pay you a visit that night. I've actually had an uncle of mine who lives in Laikipia who had planted maize in his 5-acre piece of land, and you know, and he called me frustrated, saying, Aki, you guys need to help us. This is sad. I've lost everything. So you can imagine the investment he had put into, you know, that maize, so that, you know, he can reap the benefit of that is you know, is a lot. And therefore, what do we do then to to make now the either you are pastoralist because you have livestock that are predated upon, you know, by lions and cheetahs. And the other predators. And then you have, of course, the farming communities who now live also within these wildlife areas. So how do you incentivize them to say, okay, sawa, this elephant has eaten my crops, I can excuse it, I won't kill it, I will excuse it because actually I am reaping some benefits out of it. You know, you can always give it you can release it to go, but you see what happens is you have retaliatory attacks because you're not benefiting from it. If that lion eats 3 of my cows, seriously, compensation in this country takes forever. And so what stops that person going after that lion to kill it? So sometimes it's an emotive thing with wildlife, and that's why we see communities as the stewards of conservation in this country. And if they're not supported or incentivized to see conservation as a business enterprise or how they can benefit from it, therefore we will always have human wildlife conflicts everywhere. And that's why conservancies are coming in ideally to change that narrative, to say, okay, we have a piece of land here, we have these zebras, we have giraffes, okay, so what can we do? How will I be supported by government the way it supports agriculture people? You know, they have subsidies, they have I don't know what to continue enhancing the food basket of the country. But then what about the ones that live with wildlife and whom we have to depend on tourism? You know, as I think tourism is our third GDP, our gross product income. I think it's number 3. And so you see, how do we get these people to support conservation efforts so that we continue seeing wildlife thrive? Because research has actually shown that we have lost over 70, almost 70% of our wildlife in the last 40 years. So you can imagine we are losing wildlife by the day. The space is shrinking, as Gladys said. Space is shrinking for them. So we are looking at a future that we'll be going to zoos kuangalia wildlife ziki wako caged, you know, because now space will be lost. Land fragmentation in this Atikapiti area that used to be a wildlife corridor from Nairobi National Park to Amboseli is closed. Okay, there's a small window of opportunity to still secure that corridor, but we are losing land by the day for wildlife. And that's why for us our work becomes crucial, because if you don't get landowners who are in these wildlife corridors to secure that land or that space for our big mammals, then we will lose our wildlife tremendously, and it's so unfortunate. And therefore one of the things that we are looking at this year will be looking at how do we finance some of these conservancies to continue to do these wildlife conservation efforts. But also, and maybe Gladys will come in to speak about this in terms of our policy work and how we are trying to get the government to support our wildlife. But there's so much that we're looking forward to for this year, including also getting as many Kenyans to know more about the role and the work of conservancies, but also to rally behind them, to support them, to invest in them, you know, whether it's in tourism, whether it's in any other, you know, activity, you know. And I know Kenyans, especially the millennials and Gen Zs, you know, they are looking for outdoor spaces where they can have fun, they can do so much, and conservancies provide these platforms where you can, whether you can go for desert safaris, you can do any activity you can think of can be done in a conservancy. And so for our role, that's what we intend to do this year, and to get as many interviews as we can, like this podcast, so that Kenyans can actually get to know more about the work that communities and private landowners are doing in the country.
Can I tell you a fact?
Yeah.
This podcast is the only one the one and only
Of its kind.
of its kind in East and Central Africa.
Well, well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
You can fact check that one, eh?
Yeah, by the way.
Fact check it.
but back to the tourism. I look at last year and beginning of the year, I got to travel to our neighboring country, which was Tanzania, and I realized that their tourism is, like you had said, is like on a high notch, and I don't know what Kenya is doing about that, because the one thing I realized about Tanzania, the difference between Tanzania and Kenya is the government has let the tourism sector handle their own issues. They're not managed by the government.
Yeah.
Unlike Kenya, whereby we find the government wants to be in it and at the same time doesn't want to be in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you guys are doing about
It's like they're
that.
there, but then they don't want
Yeah,
to be.
they have one foot
Yeah.
inside, another foot outside.
Yeah.
it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
And I can say, I think just this mentioned that tourism is, I think, our third the highest GDP earner.
Yes.
But we have so much room to grow, even to become a fast. Looking at our level of infrastructure as a country, looking at what we've said, that we have a wide network beyond national parks to conservancies. I think it's just a way of how do we create the shift, the transformation.
Okay.
And I will focus this from a policy perspective, because that's where I feel maybe as a feel now, and like actually it connects to what you've said. Maybe they want to be there, the government doesn't want to be there. I think when you look at, we are in the process of reviewing a number of our policies, and policy is also one of our key priorities in terms of this year, but also has been a key priority across the years. When you look at our way of doing tourism, our Tourism Act, that is, we are in the process of reviewing our Tourism Act of 2011. A big chunk of it has largely focused on government institutions.
Yes.
And when you look at tourism is a market-driven and it's agenda largely, because government cannot be the creator of tourism opportunities. Government is largely supposed to be a facilitator and enabler to that process, but not a product developer, for instance, per se. And so when you look at now our model, our policy framework, our act framework, our legislative framework, the much focus is on institutional governance. And we have so many tourism institutions.
Yes.
When you look at the number of tourism institutions, I think they have the biggest number of sagas across the country, and most of them doing largely the same things, or they could have been sort of merged and done a lot more.
Yeah.
And so the place of the private sector, and when I say private sector, is not just the investors. The private sector is the investors in the tourism industry, but we've seen a lot of now the tourism has grown over the years, especially after post-COVID. It's no longer about the traditional tourism, ile ya safari mnaenda sijui wapi, hapana. Things have shifted. And so how is our policy space transforming to support that? And how is the government policy framework supporting the same, again the same? And so we see right now a lot of local tourism. Tourism traditionally has been seen mugeni, hata ukienda kutembea mahali unaambiwa wewe ni mugeni, as in you're a local. And especially in these unfortunately wildlife areas, the tradition has been, the mindset has been, you are only a mugeni if you're a white person. And that's a bad thing. But we've seen post-COVID that a lot of these tourism facilities actually sustained because of the local tourism, the Kenyan tourism. So how are we tapping and government enabling that local tourism? And tourism is expensive setting up. When you look at the cost of the levies that you're supposed to do, there's a whole schedule. I think it's for Schedule 4 of the Tourism Act. A whole segment of the levies that are supposed, the whatevers that TRA collects, the Tourism Regulatory Authority. Some of them are so sort of duplicated and becomes expensive. For you to set up something like this, you will see that schedule. You have either tourism, number one, you will have the food and beverages, you have camp, you have I don't know what, all those things. So it becomes very expensive for the locals. Number two, even the financial structures that have been set up or that were supposed to enable the tourism corporation finance that was supposed to provide sort of capital for institutions or for people to develop, it's not highly accessible. And even in the tourism drafting, the review process, there's a proposal that it's removed. So where do people turn to? Will you turn to the banks? You know how right now the banking sector accessing funding and all that. Yes, the lower rates are lower, but what's the capacity of people to access such funds? The communities themselves, we did say that we have about 70% of Conservancies being community. But for you as a community to develop a tourism product, I'll have to wait for an investor, because I can't even set up a simple banda. It's not just about setting up a simple banda, it's the access, the road. Do you have the road network? Do you have the facility? Do you have, and you're talking about ecotourism. Ecotourism has to have those standards. You need to match and compete. Are you able to do that? If you were trying to do your digital sort of kidogo marketing, tax is so it's complicated. So for the communities to develop credible, even that can meet the different markets, from the low market for the medium to the high end, it requires cost, and it requires education. It requires you to access something. And so the government, I think, needs to come up to match that, number one. It really needs to also really diversify. We are traditionally been supporting or advertising beach. When you mention Kenya tourism, it's coast. And there's so much more. Just hapa kidogo, you'll just go around. You see, guys are doing even agri-tourism. I think a few weeks ago, we went and experienced agri-tourism. It's beautiful. So there's so much that has evolved. The Conservancy itself, it's adventure tourism, it's ecotourism in its own inherent. It's so wide and vast. We have said we have 215 Conservancies in 29 counties, and all of them are offering diverse opportunities. What you'll experience in Mara is different from what you'll experience from Uko North, even Uko Garissa and Wajir. It's different from what you'll experience just up around Nairobi area. So that diversity, we need to embrace that, and government needs to really enable and not just focus on governance, institution, and that just collecting tax, but also reinvesting back into conservation. Because again, one of the challenges we are facing is that yes, we generate so much from tourism, but how much is going back into the conservation? It doesn't match. There's no
Actually,
match.
I have a question. How many bodies are there regulating tourism?
Jeez, do we have the number? We can give you the numbers, but they are number. We are not attacking tourism, by the way.
Yes.
It's just that we need to make it constructive.
Yes.
And maybe just to also add to your point on why Tanzania seems to have more tourists or thrive in tourism than Kenya, I think it also goes to how we present ourselves. I think one of the biggest undoing I think Kenya has done is some of the, I don't know whether we call them policies, like when you enter the JKI and how they, check your bags. The airport itself is not conducive, but it's basically just how you also handle your clients from the point of entry, also determines a lot. And Kenya, one of the things that it's appreciated most for, it's its marketing capability. And our marketing is just top notch, and of course that's why the role of KTB is so crucial for Kenya. But when you look at Tanzania, I think it's just how they have been able to manage also their parks and reserves. And I think also Gladys did mention about the priorities we have in our country, conservation being seen as secondary, rather than like the main thing, and why conservation definitely needs to be of priority. Of course, the KWS, its main mandate is conservation, but they also have to think of ways that they can sustain themselves in terms of tourism. So of course they have to get investors and focus on tourism and bring in all these numbers of people and all that. But I think if they were supported more in terms of conserving or conservation, I think the national parks in Kenya would be tremendous. And I was in Arusha this past weekend, and we were meeting some visitors over there from the US, and some of them, it was their first time in Africa, and they went to Arusha National Park. So Arusha National Park is like their fourth best national park. in Tanzania, and the stories these guys give, you'd think that like they were in paradise, because they they told us they saw each and every wildlife, and it was interesting. And so of course Tanzania, the TANAPA and TAMWA, the bodies that are mandated to do conservation, I mean, it's top notch. And I think for Kenya, we need now to focus more on how we can support conservation more. And of course, marketing is an important component to that. And of course, the hospitality of Kenyans also makes it also an important aspect, because that's what also people come to visit, for. But then I feel that for us to grow the numbers that, the Kenyan government is thinking of reaching, I think they are looking at, I think, increasing our current numbers from, I think we are currently at 1 million visitors per year. I think they are aiming to reach at 5 million visitors per year. I think that would require that they now invest more in conservancies, because conservancies are now coming in to provide that diversified tourism product, for the country. And so if they can be incentivized to then think of other ways that they can increase tourism, I think that would be great. And of course, we have a partnership with KTB, and we are thinking of ways in which we can also support some of these areas through their Magical Kenya Signatures experience, to be able to market themselves better. And so there's room for improvement for the country, but I think we have high potential to get to that 5 million tourists in a year. Yeah.
Parting shot, because time is not on our side. Gladys, briefly, how does your future look like when you talk about KWCA?
We just started. We just started the other day, 2013, and when I say we just started, conservation impacts they take long.
Okay.
And I think that's one thing that people need to appreciate, that conservation investments are a long-term investment.
Yes.
The Conservancy network is about 3 decades old.
Okay.
KWCA, we are about 13 years old. There's hope.
Yes.
There's resilience by the communities.
Yes.
And there's a lot of opportunity.
Okay.
I think untapped an opportunity, and especially when it comes to community-led conservation.
Okay.
And when I say community-led conservation, it's just not community, even landowners-led, because again, we need to appreciate communities are not beggars who call. Communities are landowners, and they're the biggest landowners in Kenya. So there's hope and there's the resilience, and the fact that we've grown from a membership from I think we started off with about less than 15 members, 2013, and right now we are at 215 members. Then it shows you that there's a lot of enthusiasm around it. There's a lot of hope that conservation can be recognized as a rewarding land use, and conservation, I mean, it's the way to go. We are all looking for green spaces. Hata kwa apartment, people are now trying to look for green spaces. So if we can really maintain and support conservation in a manner that really sustain also this coexistence, how do we navigate, and especially in this current era, navigate those opportunities for coexistence? I think there's a lot of hope, but there's a lot of support also required. Not just financial, yes, but also goodwill from Kenyans, goodwill from young people, goodwill from friends. There has to be a lot of concerted effort. It can't be done by one person. So for us, we're just a network, just trying to put together people who have taken that role of stewarding and trying to just help. How can we create a platform, a voice, a network that really creates those conservation impacts, but more so benefits the people? Okay. So are those 3 words?
You've tried. Yes. You've tried. To you, when we talk about communication, what are in a very short, brief,
a very summarized
few strategies that you have at your desk that probably projects communication to the communities? Because at the end of the day, from what I've heard, it's about communities and the symbiosis of You know, so yeah.
Yeah, so for communities, our strategy is to get them to understand different aspects of community-led conservation. Actually, I think last week we started the idea of using illustrations to communicate our messages, because like animations.
Okay.
Animations. What do you call those? The ones that are print. They're not illustrations. I don't know what they're called, but we call them illustrations. So, so one of the things we are trying to see is how do we also get everyone within the conservancy involved. A conservancy can, especially a community conservancy, can have up to 4,000 members. Imagine, in one community conservancy. So you want to reach everyone in that conservancy with, of course, the message of community-led conservation and its benefits. And so the strategies that we've put in place is that one for illustration. So if we are training on governance, for example, to have equitable governance or good governance, we have to depict it in a way that they understand, that they can relate, so that comprehension becomes much easier and faster. And we have tried that. Last week we did that in another community, and it worked wonders. The engagement was more meaningful by the communities. They could actually relate to some of the things that they were seeing in these posters and that kind of a thing. The other strategy we are looking at is also the use of community radio, because we know, of course, community radio is actually one of the most listened, I think, communication tool. And so we are targeting different community radios with radio feature programs to just communicate about conservancies and our work. And also we will be looking at doing films, like community films, to just educate them on various aspects, whether it's carbon, whether it's on governance, whether it's on policy. We are looking at ways in which, and even the conservancy model in itself, not everyone, of course, gets to understand how it works. And so we are exploring various strategies on how we can reach all these communities. And those are the three that we have found to be at least more productive and more useful to, to communities to basically understand the messaging that we want to pass.
Awesome.
Nice,
Now, are you guys on
nice,
social
nice.
media platforms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe you can tell us
Yeah.
your platforms.
She's the guru.
Oh, actually, that's
Ask me other policy stuff.
Yeah. So we are actually on all social media platforms apart from TikTok. So we are on Facebook. That's our most active social media platform. So if you look for Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association, you'll find us there. We are on X. We are on Instagram. And we are on YouTube. We also have videos that people can, watch to just learn more about the work that we do with our conservancy members. And we're also on LinkedIn. So,
Nice.
and we are also on we have a website, www.kwcakenya.com. So you can also learn more about our work on those platforms.
Do you guys mind? Being followed personally?
No,
on Instagram?
please. Follow us, subscribe.
Follow, subscribe, hit that like button,
That
everything.
like button, exactly.
LinkedIn for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Thank you so much, guys, for coming. We do appreciate. This has been a wonderful episode. And our viewers, kindly just check below their handles, and we hope to hear from them soon again.
Yes.
Yeah, because it
Definitely.
seems we haven't even touched
Yeah.
nothing. Eh?
No.
What do you guys?
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but the amount of information I have gathered today is it's a lot.
Yeah.
And that's just a tip of the iceberg for what you guys do.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah, so guys, follow us as well. Comment pale chini, andika what you want to hear from them. And we see you on the next episode. Asante.